Hello and welcome to the Common Sense Corner. I'm Chris Darkins, your host. I am the founder and managing trustee of the Article 4 Society, and we are starting this new format for conversation and dialogue to help people better understand what their rights are, and more importantly, how sometimes government and laws sometimes conflict with some of the rights that we have. And there are specific procedures and remedies in place that allow you to essentially circumvent those laws so that you can affect your rights wholly and fully. On today's show, we have a special guest, Marquette Williams, who is a personal friend of mine, who is also a director and author of many scripts and movies, highly involved in the Hollywood scene, where a lot of the things that we see and are conditioned to believe are actually fictions and or half-truths and or parts of the imagination that have come to the big screen by gentlemen such as Marquette, and a lot of times they form our ideas and concepts around things and how we view them because they are at the forefront of what we consider to be entertainment, but actually educates us. Marquette, how are you doing today?
I'm excellent, Chris. How about yourself?
I'm doing well, thank you. Thank you for taking some time out of your day to kind of visit with us and talk. This is a brand new format for us. And what we're trying to do is just trying to have conversations with thought leaders around the world where we can get some honest opinions from people, from individuals who are just living their daily lives and who on a regular basis come into some type of contact with the law and have certain feelings and positions on that. And we'd like to kind of bring clarity to it. Can you talk a little bit about some of the properties and films and scripts that you've written in Hollywood?
Well, I tend to write mostly screenplays, but I do some social stuff in terms of documentaries and things of that nature. So I would like to believe my art is created to create hero stories. It also has a conscious element to it as well.
Mhm. Now, Marquette, you did a film called Fatherhood 101, which
Right.
I touches a lot on some universal truths and some issues where the law makes you believe that certain things are authorized according to God's law, but really they're not. In can you talk just a little bit about fatherhood, and then I'll come back to the kind of the point that I was trying to make.
Well, I think the thing with fatherhood is that you make a child and you are financially responsible for the child, but you might not have any rights to the child. And there are laws that are set up that basically designate, your parental rights and control if you haven't married the mother or things of that nature. So a lot of fathers, um, they understand they need to pay for a child that they've created, but they don't necessarily have visitation and other rights to the child that they've created. So the system is set up to collect the money, but the system isn't set up to create time with child.
Certainly, Marquette, is there a website for fatherhood?
You can go to fatherhood101.net and check it out there. You can also go to YouTube. We've got some links posted on YouTube as well. So, it's kind of already out there, just kind of making its way through the world, so to speak.
Hmm. Hmm. Well, the interesting thing about fatherhood is it really highlights the fact that a lot of parents and individuals don't really know what their rights are, and to actually believe that your parental rights, that it's okay for your parental rights to be terminated, is actually, kind of quite contrary to what God would say. And when we have this I guess this discussion about how sometimes man's law authorizes things that God's law does not, the concept that you can just sign away your parental rights and walk away with no additional obligation or responsibility is somewhat absurd, or with just financial responsibility is somewhat absurd. Would you agree with that?
I mean, I think that it's the fact that they're that your rights are even on the table for the discussion is absurd, right? So even giving them up or taking them away, either way, uh, that's a continuation of that type of legal madness. But I also think that we've created that situation by, not viewing family as, you know, kind of a unit that can't be broken, so to speak, and how we enter that union, and how we deal with the offspring of that union. Once we bring, the court system into our homes and into our families, uh, you're gonna have these type of problems because the legal system looks at people as numbers. It doesn't really look at a person as a human being and look at their life as, a very complex series of events. And the outcome of those events are sometimes the difficulties that we as, adults.
Okay, Marquette, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay.
Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yeah, I did. I did. It's an interesting concept, an interesting thought when you talk about how the fact that it's kind of crazy that our rights are even on the table for discussion, and how when you allow the legal system to kind of intervene in your lives and have a say as to what's happening, it really just it dehumanizes everything, and it also, to some extent, it takes away what you have. It takes away any repercussions associated with moral consequences that you make, moral decisions that you make, and the consequences that you face. And it kind of absolves you of that, at least in the eyes of the law, but not in the eyes of God. Because, if you are responsible for raising your kids till they get to a point of maturity, but the law all of a sudden comes in, man's law all of a sudden comes in and says, well, we've defined your rights and obligations, and then you rely on that, thinking that, oh, well, the law says this is what my rights and obligations are, and that's all that you live up to, then you're really doing a great disservice to your kids and to society.
Exactly. I mean, the question becomes, what is the benefit of these things? And that's the hard part to figure out. Like, you would think that the benefit of keeping the family together would outweigh the benefits of keeping us apart. But clearly, we've created a system that is not, pro-family. It is not, they talk about pro-choice, but in actuality, they're not really for your own personal choices. Um, and that's the thing that's confusing, I think, about uh, the laws that we have created as a people in a way. Um, because when you get into what is biblical law, um, in a lot of ways, sometimes it's the law of common sense. It's the law of what makes sense, right? Um, you got two people, they've had a child. Do you really have the right to divvy up the value of that child to each parent? And do you have the right to say who gets more and who gets less? You know,
Hmm.
um, and then on a weird uh, twist of fate, right? We divvy up the family and we divvy up the rights, and later on, we don't want to deal with the outcome of a broken home, right? Which is really like all these children who are displaced, who don't have a moral foundation. Um, so it's a weird thing. It's how do you keep it balanced, and how do you make it to where our laws ultimately don't imprison us within our choices, right? And so I'm torn when we have these conversations. I find myself torn because part of myself is somewhat wanting to be conservative and somewhat wanting to be spiritual, but another part of me is like, isn't freedom just the ability to make your own choices in your life, however you choose, right? Isn't that the basis of freedom is to find happiness, and whatever makes you happy um, is really an extension of you exercising that freedom. And for some reason, I often feel like the way that the world is set now, and the way that it continues to move, happiness is kind of like not even on the table in terms of discussion in today's world. Um, you don't. It's not about a person's individual happiness. even though someone will tell you that that's what America was founded on, was the ability for people to be happy in an individual manner. You know what I mean? But we spend a lot of time really just infringing on everyone's happiness and kind of telling people what they can and can't do. And depending on the viewpoint, right, will really dictate what you can and can't do. In one sense, you may enact a law that seems like it gives people freedoms, but also that same law could be taken away. As you said, accountability, right? And clearly, accountability will always um, be what's needed because when you remove that from mankind, you create a type of I guess I would call it a type of spiritual or emotional anarchy, right? Where if you look at today's youth, the one thing that I'd say is gravely affecting today's youth is inability to be held responsible for their choices. At this point in time, if you kill someone, there's absolutely a reason. Like, it's like, oh, well, that person has a mental illness, or oh, they were bullied, or oh, and after a while, it's like, is there really an excuse when you kill somebody? Like, really? There's really an excuse for that? But we've made excuses for everything to the point of where now no one is responsible for their own actions. You know what I mean? There's a mental disability for everything you can think of. There's an allergy for everything that ails our society. You know what I'm saying? So I tend to find that absolves people of their own particular participation in their destiny.
I would I would full-heartedly concur with that. And I think the point that I frequently try to make is that laws that attempt to regulate people's moral behavior actually tend to destroy morality because now people are acting based upon a directive as opposed to a faith-based moral choice to do something. And you'll commonly hear, I'm not going to do that because it's illegal. When really what you should be hearing is, I'm not going to do that because it's wrong, because it's immoral. So I think when you're giving a directive, when the law gives you a directive and you rely on that directive to make a decision, you weaken the muscle, that muscle that connects you to your faith to allow you to make faith-based decisions. And this brings me back to a book in the Bible, Galatians, in which Paul is writing a letter to the Galatians and is essentially saying, look, you guys have been relying on the law of the Pharisees to make you righteous. And he says, man's law can't make you righteous. You have to make decisions based upon your faith. When Christ came and gave his life, he came under the law, and he came as a man to deliver you from the law so that you could make decisions consistent with your faith outside and above the law. Because, if I make a decision based upon a directive, I'm not really making a decision. So I'm not really evidencing any type of moral grounding. I'm saying, hey, look, I'm scared of that consequence, so I'm just going to do what you told me. And a lot of times what we see is that a lot of laws are totally counter to morality. In a conversation previous to this, you once talked about, 100 years ago, blacks and whites couldn't marry. Well, there's nothing that I see in the Bible that prohibits marriage between the races. So if there's a law that prohibits something that God authorizes, are you obligated to abide by it? And then if you are not obligated to abide by it, what remedy do you have when man's law tries to inflict a consequence? I think for Marquette, for the last 16 years, and we've known each other for quite some time, but for the last 16 years, you've seen me caught up in this struggle trying to reconcile the fact that I grew up in a Christian home, in the church, went to a Catholic high school, and one day I'm driving down the street after being told for my whole life that I have free will. I have the ability to act on my conscience as long as I don't do anything that hurts anyone. As long as I love thy neighbor as I love myself. But one day I'm driving down the street in Houston and I get pulled over, snatched out of my car and thrown in jail for something as trivial as an illegal lane change. And for me, that caused a lot of discord and turmoil within me, within myself, because I believe something to be true, that I have the ability to act with free will, that I have the ability to do anything that I decide to do, as long as I don't damage someone else or injure someone else or damage their property. But that's what I was brought up being told. But then all of a sudden, the real world serves me up a different reality. So I go to the church thinking, like, you know, where's the justice in that? Where's the answer in that? Where's the reality in what you're teaching, and how do we reconcile those two? So God sent me on this path for the last 16 years, where I've been studying the law and its origin and the Constitution and everything in America, and I finally came to certain conclusions about 4 or 5 years ago, and certain revelations were made to me through study, that there are remedies and provisions that are made available to us if we want to act uh, based upon our faith. And you know, those legal procedures and processes are still in existence, to the point where God's word is true. You know, in Paul's word in the Galatians is true, that you know, we are not subject to man's law; we're subject to God's law. Now, certainly, if we break one of the Ten Commandments, God will sit in a jury box with 12 individuals who are judging you, 12 individual peers who are judging you and inflicting God's justice upon you. But it's through those 12 individuals that God is acting, and that sentence and that justice is handed out. But there are a lot of laws, such as you know, possession laws, even to some extent traffic laws, where there's no property damage or injury to anybody. That in which, you know, we're subject to laws that make no rhyme, that have no sense and no rhyme or reason to them. And just in the case of Fatherhood 101, where you have laws that are affixing obligations to people that are contrary, or absolving people of responsibility that are contrary to God's law, you think to yourself, like, you know, this does not make sense to me. And even in areas even more akin to keeping the home together, you know, through various man-made laws, we've now come to the conclusion that things such as divorce, breaking up the family, is morally justifiable. Why? Because the law allows for you to get a divorce. But in reality, the Bible doesn't. The Bible does not make a provision for divorce. When Jesus was asked about Moses and him allowing divorce, he says, well, that's not the law. That was an exception that Moses carved out for those who were stiff-necked and heavy-hearted. And it was more out of compassion for the woman, because these individuals were so heavy-hearted that if he did not let them go from them, something detrimental to them would have happened. But it's just interesting to me that the law prohibits and or authorizes certain things that are counter to God's law. And because that happens, and we have been conditioned to make decisions based upon directives as opposed to our moral, faith-based decisions or guidance, those laws now make things okay for us, and they have a tendency of overriding our moral center, when in essence our moral center should be driving all of our decisions. And one of the things that we do at the Article 4 Society, and I'm going to branch off to a little commercial here, one of the things that we do at the Article 4 Society is we like to make things available, tools available to people who want to follow their faith, who want to make faith-based decisions. We like to give them the tools that they need in order to successfully do that. And all too often, there is no real remedy to that. So one of the things that we have going on here is we have a Liberty Workshop that is taking place. It's going to be every Wednesday and every Saturday. And it's a workshop in which we're going to take you through a 2-hour session. We're going to walk you through the documents that you need if you ever find yourself in a situation where you made a faith-based decision which is contrary to what the law says, that allows you to vindicate yourself in court. And it has all the Supreme Court decisions, because these remedies exist in our state constitution, and we teach you how to invoke those remedies in our state constitutions and in our federal constitutions to protect your rights to make decisions based upon faith as long as you don't damage anyone's property or injure anyone. So that is one of the offers that we're making available here, and we'll just sit on the top of the screen. And Marquette, I'm going to come back to you and get your thoughts on the commentary that I just made.
Okay.
So once again, this offer can be found on the Article 4 website, www.a4s2. We're offering this at a special price right now of $197 for the 2-hour seminar. Typically, we give these seminars for $500 a piece. But for those who are tuned into this conversation, we are making that available to you at a discounted price. Also included in that is a 1-year membership to the Article 4 Society's social networking site, which allows you to fellowship and unite with other individuals who have like minds. So we implore you to kind of join and get involved in that, and learn how to protect your rights. Now, Marquette, in Fatherhood 101, that takes place primarily based out of Ohio, correct?
Correct.
And I believe I'm sorry, go ahead.
Most of it takes place in inside of Cuyahoga County, yes.
Okay. And I believe it really focuses on one piece of federal legislation called the Brady Bill.
Yes.
And that Brady Bill essentially has effect in all of the 50 states, I believe, as it relates to child support, and has been the cause of many individuals being incarcerated.
Correct. The thing about the Brady Bill, it basically makes it to where any child support that's back owed cannot be reduced for any reason. So let's say that you are in Afghanistan, serving your country. You are captured and held for 5 months, and then you are subsequently freed and returned back to America. You will owe 5 months of back child support, and that child support cannot be reduced or cast aside regardless. Even if you were to say, hey man, I was being held hostage for 5 months, it has no value in terms of the Brady law. So the scary part of that is that every law that's created, even when it's enacted upon a person, a person's life, their situation, should take and be a part of some form of enacting that law upon that person. You can tell a person not to steal, right? We all say stealing's wrong. But if you are dealing with a child who was stealing for food in the aftermath of a hurricane, well, circumstances may come into play there. And so I think that we have to begin to also look at how our laws are applied in each and every circumstance. Yes, fathers should pay child support. That goes without being said. The question becomes, do we have the right to put fathers in prison when they are behind in their child support? Or do we have the right to create negative marks on fathers' credits? Because, your credit report is how you do everything. And if you have a negative report on your credit report, it might keep you from finding a place to live, or keep you from getting transportation, or keep you from having a bank account. Well, all that can be affected by your child support because that's a negative mark on your credit report. So I think that we have to begin to look at how we apply laws on an individual basis and how those laws affect people, because that is the way that our legal system should work. It has to be each individual person is judged by their peers based upon their situational circumstance.
Certainly, and I think the overarching point is that yes, fathers should be responsible for supporting their children. And the real question becomes whether or not
Exactly.
child support is the actual mechanism by which that should be done. And if you're making a legal decision, or if you're making a decision based upon the law, you feel as if your obligation is absolved based upon the fact that you've actually made a payment. And a lot of times those payments aren't sufficient to even support the kids. So, in reality,
Correct.
again, you have a law which is absolving you, or which in practice is providing absolution for your godly obligations as a father. So, I think if once we get society to be more accountable by holding them accountable to standards that actually make sense, because I mean, you made a point earlier in a previous conversation that we had that it's really about when you have man-made laws and they don't make sense to you, and you question why is this law exist and why do I have to abide by it, it creates internal conflict. And a lot of times it can also lead to uh, self-esteem issues, right?
Oh
If
yeah,
the
self-esteem, self-value.
Yeah, self-esteem, self-value. If the law says you're doing something wrong, right, then you now believe like, oh, I'm a failure. When in all actuality, you're not really doing anything wrong. Just someone sat there and wrote a law, said this is inappropriate, this is wrong. You may be doing everything else by the book, and a lot of times it might just be guidelines that the state law requires some agency to follow. And while that child may be perfectly well taken care of, you're still being subject to uh, these requirements that go above and beyond or outside of the scope of your supporting that child. Because child support is not, I mean, supporting a child is not strictly a monetary thing.
Well, I think it's greater than the monetary thing. Supporting a child is an emotional thing, and the real question becomes, how do we create laws that rip our families apart? You have to create legislation that's going to bring the family together. I think that we put a lot of focus on the financial value of a father and very little focus on the emotional value of a father. And that emotional value is really what guides a child. It is not the money. Just because the father puts up money doesn't mean the child's going to be morally strong. Um, the time with child tends to always bring about a certain moral character. Um, it's statistically proven. Even a bad father has greater value than no father at all.
Mm-hmm.
As long as the child is not at harm in terms of being abused physically or mentally. No one's perfect, right? And so when I was talking earlier about things not feeling right, I think that everybody internally has a natural moral clock, right? It doesn't
Well,
mean you always listen to it, but
well, God,
everybody knows.
God says that the law, my law is written on your heart, right? So that is your internal moral clock. But go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, and that's exactly the truth. I think that everybody, a dog, my dog knows right from wrong. It doesn't mean that she always listens, but she knows right from wrong. And I think that, human beings are no different. Internally, we know we've done something we shouldn't do. You don't have to tell me how to be a parent. I know what to do as a parent. I may not do it, which means I'm a bad parent. Um, what I tend to find is that we create these laws that we think will create structure, we think will create a sense of moral code, but they're not coming from the right place. And what
Mm-hmm.
they wind up doing is they wind up misdirecting a person's natural way of understanding something, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, I don't need a driver's license to know not to drive like a fool,
Right.
right? Because driving like a fool really means, I'm not going to drive where I could harm somebody. God's law tells you not to harm, anything on God's green earth. So we know that. Uh, the creating of laws to regulate that, to regulate common sense, so to speak, removes the natural instinct that is within common sense, right? If I'm more worried about, prime example, uh, you know, you will be in places in California where it is completely frowned upon to panhandle, right?
Hmm.
And so you would say that it's illegal to panhandle. They'll go to jail for asking for money, right? Um, which, in one sense, that should be based on an individual person's personal feelings, because you may encounter that person, and you may feel like they don't need it. They are just um, stealing from you, right?
They're
But you may
fraud.
also encounter, right, and they're fraud.
They tell you
You may
something,
also,
I'm homeless, and they're really not.
exactly.
That's a fraud.
But then you might meet a family that's really homeless,
Correct.
and you could be that person that could feed them for the night. And I think, again, that's kind of how the laws should work. It should be based upon your own personal choice, your own natural intuition on what is the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do. Um,
But see, and
law. Go ahead.
I think that's a great example, panhandling, correct, right? So, I mean, I just want to delve into those two circumstances. You have one individual that's telling you I'm homeless and I, lost my job and, I have all these other mitigating, extraordinary circumstances that have caused me to be here, but he's lying. So that is fraud. That is injury. You're taking my money under false pretenses, right? But then you have the other side of it,
Exactly.
where you have the family that is actually homeless and has no place to go and needs food to eat and needs money to be able to find shelter just to get back on their feet, right? That is not, there is no injury or crime in that. But we have one law that essentially says panhandling is illegal. So now everybody is subject to it. And now the people that need help can't get it, right? And the people that want to help can't help because those people aren't around. So now you've taken away my ability to give charity and you've taken away somebody else's ability to find sustenance because you wanted to create a law. Whereas it should be governed under each individual circumstances you're talking about. Each individual circumstance should be a judge. If I give this guy money and I find out that he's been lying, well, I should be able to take him to a court and have a judge and jury of his peers who God can speak through render a judgment against this individual based upon whether or not he did something or did not do something. But we've gone to the
Correct.
society where we just create rules that they're like a blunt instrument when you really need surgical instruments, right? So I think that that's a very valid and good point on the panhandling piece.
I mean, just in general, when you create anything that a person's freedom or property is subject to being taken or put into a cage, there's a problem. When we start believing that there's some form of rehabilitation by putting people in cages, there's a problem. Everything was created to be free. We had this talk earlier. I cannot understand a society that still operates with such draconian methods, right? If we tried it in the 13th century and it didn't work, we tried it in the 15th century and it didn't work. We tried it in the 19th century, it didn't work. We're trying it in the 21st century and it's still not working. You cannot imprison people and force them to change. Change doesn't work like that. Democracy doesn't work like that. You can't even control people with your laws.
Yeah,
What you wind up creating is a fierce society, right? And there's no love out of fear.
no love out of fear. Everyone's operating under duress and coercion. And I just want to I want to elaborate my stance on imprisonment. I mean, there's certain people that you have to remove from society because their behavior is so detrimental. But
Right.
I think the challenge that we have is we're not removing people from society whose behavior is detrimental. We're just
No.
removing people because we decided that they did something that we don't think people should be able to have the freedom to do. Not because
Right.
it's hurt someone or it's damaging anyone's property, none of that. It just has to. We just don't like it.
Man, we got
So we're
2 million people, 2 million people in prison plus. There's no
gonna.
way that all 2 million people are a detriment to society.
Well, we have 7 million people under the jurisdiction of the correctional system. Okay,
Oof.
in this 7 million people under the supervision of the correctional system, which means someone else is their authority. Not God, not their Senate court, not even the laws. Someone subservient to the law is their authority, who determines when they can leave the city, when they can leave the state, determines what time they have to be home. Right? That's for 7 million people. And I can tell you the vast majority of those individuals did not commit a crime in which there was injury to another person or damage to property. The overwhelming majority of those people are there because of what's referred to as strict liability offenses.
Well,
Numbers
yeah,
are astounding.
the problem here in our society is that you can drop bombs on babies and be considered a hero,
Hmm.
right? Um, you can decide that you're a sovereign state, don't want to pay taxes, and be thrown underneath the prison.
Right.
And I find that to be an interesting thing, right? You get more time for not paying taxes than you do for dropping bombs on babies,
Hmm.
and
That's ridiculous.
that's the problem with our society. There has to be a level of we're going to appreciate and respect all human life first, and that there is no right to take a human life. And if we can start from there and work our way back, um, we might be able to be successful at changing the way things are going. As long as we need to, put allowances on, the value of a life, right? Then there's a problem because there is no such thing. You have to allow people to be who they are and to live their life, as they choose, even when you may or may not like it. You know what I'm saying? But you can't go on around and just be putting people in prison because they have a difference in opinion upon what that happiness equals to, which is a lot of this stuff. If you look at the drug laws, those are no one wants to be a drug dealer. Those are crimes out of desperation and opportunity. If there was a better economy in our country with more jobs, you would find people selling drugs less.
Yeah.
But
More
you can't sit up here.
more jobs and less barriers to entry for opportunity. You know,
Exactly.
we create
Exactly.
barriers to our you can't be a lawyer unless you've gone to an accredited 2 year or 4 year or 3 year law school and you have to pass the bar. Okay, you'll fix a test to it. Now, if I go and I self study, why do I have to spend $150,000 and wait 4 years if I can self study in a year? I can't be a real estate agent unless I go to real estate school. And well, if I can pick up a book and self study, why do I have to spend $10,000? Right? If I can pass your test, then why is it that I need to go? So there are a lot of regulatory hurdles that are put in place that prohibit people from pursuing happiness. So now
Well, I
they're.
kind of look at it like going to the club,
Mhm.
right? You go to a club and just to get in, right? Just to get in, you're tipping people along the way.
Mhm.
You're tipping the doorman, you're tipping the valet, you're tipping the bar, you're tipping everybody just to get in. That's kind of how they view everything. So college, all these different things, you have to tip everybody just to get in, right? You got to pay all my friends before I give you your piece of paper. You know what I mean? And I want to make you stay a long time in paying my friends before you can get your piece of paper. And then after I give you your piece of paper, you're going to be in debt to all my friends for a very long time. And that's kind of the system we've created. College kids are coming out of college in an astronomical amount of debt. And they're going to spend, a third of their life trying to pay that off.
Mhm. Right.
And that's criminal in itself. Education has never been meant to cost that much, man. It's
No.
ridiculous, dude. It's ridiculous.
Well, especially when information and knowledge is free. It's on the books, it's in the libraries. And anybody who has the initiative should be able to go to the library and get it. But what they do is they create these barriers, these legal barriers, to make you believe it's not possible. Now, the one thing I will tell you is that the greatest travesty of all of this is that through knowledge and information, this is all, you know, you can overcome it. With what we do at the Article 4 Society is we teach people that, look, here's the law, and here's what it has authority over. So while the law may say something, its authority does not rest over you in every facet of your life. And there are certain ways and things that there are certain things that you have to do in order to protect your God-given inalienable rights under the law. And I don't mean to sound like a commercial, but again, that's what the Liberty Workshop is for, to give you the basis, the knowledge that you need to have in order to be able to enjoy these professions that you want to get engaged in. You may not be able to enjoy them as a licensed individual, but you can certainly enjoy them as an individual who has the knowledge and the capacity to do these projects without interference from the government. And I think that just like the panhandling laws or the authorization of divorce or the prohibition of all of these different things that they consider to be immoral, like polygamy and those type of things, they all lead you to believe that I'm constrained by these laws that are in place, when in reality, our constitutions actually protect our rights, but we just have not been taught, and I think the system consciously does this. It refuses to teach us the ways to utilize those instruments in order to protect our rights. So a lot of the times we find ourselves with these seemingly real, but actually imaginary barriers to entry to do different things. And I think if we just got this information out there, I think it would essentially open up the economy. You'd have less broken homes. I mean, if you think about just the concept of the law authorizing divorce, whereas the Bible doesn't, I mean, it would have a dramatic change on the family structure, because what you would have is okay, a woman would now understand that, look, all these insecurities I have about my man leaving or cheating with somebody else or doing this or doing that would change, because they would know that God doesn't allow you to leave me. You're not authorized to go anywhere. And at the end of the day, God is going to make his will felt. And so don't think that it's easy enough just to say, oh, I'm going to get a divorce. No, you made a covenant before God. And God said, what God has put together, let no man put asunder. So don't even believe that you can go somewhere or that there's divorce. So it would eliminate some of the insecurities that you have in the home, because you understand. It would also, in the Bible, God says that, man, you are to cherish your wife. You are to exalt her. You're supposed to do all of these things to make her feel special. It gives you some tasks to do, things that you're supposed to do. So if men lived according to that, we'd have fewer broken homes, fewer broken marriages. We'd have kids who grow up with fathers and mothers in the same households. So, as long as we kind of revert back to God's law, and like the Pharisees in Galatians, if we allow the writers of these laws to position themselves as if they're gods and have authority over us, then we're going to have a problem, because we don't need, as a people, especially in America, this great country America, whose constitution, whose governments were founded on biblical, if not Christian, biblical, definitely, principles, as articulated in the Declaration of Independence by the law of nature and nature's God, right? And that clears it all up. Nature's God. Okay, who is your God? All right, mine's Yahweh, yours is Allah. Okay, great. If they are God, then did they create nature? Okay, so then they are the God of nature. So we can get out of all these religious conversations and discussions and going back and forth and just realize that biblical law and man's law, a lot of times, conflict. And the only value man's law has in relation to biblical law is procedural and remedial, because God's law is substantive law. This is the law of substance. This is what nature's God says is allowed and is not allowed. Now, the only thing that we need for man to create is the procedure by which we judge and punish God's substantive law. and that's procedural law and remedial law. So if someone commits murder, okay, the procedure is to assemble a jury of 12 people, put them in a jury box, and let God speak through them. And the remedy is designed by law to be this X number of years for murder committed this way, X number of years for murder committed this way, and X number of years for murder committed this way. That's it. Procedural law and remedial law to back up God's substantive law. And I think once we as a society get to that point where we understand it and quit trying to rely on can't panhandle out here, so you're going to, well, okay, now you're getting in the way of God's work. Because God may have sent me by that corner to give that family $15 so that they could find their way to get something to eat, so that the next day that mother could go to a job interview and get a job to be able to protect her family. Or who knows, she might have been able to discover, the next great invention if she wasn't focusing on how she was going to eat that night.
Exactly.
So, Marquette, I'd like to thank you for joining us today. It's always wonderful and enlightening talking to you. I'd also like to implore everyone who has the chance to frequent this, I call it webcast, to go and check out Fatherhood 101. The website is www.fatherhood101.us. And I'm sure at some point there will be a link on here for video on demand. You should watch it. You should check it out. It's a very touching and inspiring movie, documentary, featuring some very well-known people like Tyrese Gibson, Alan Thicke, Grant Hill, some people that you wouldn't think actually have gone through these type of situations or have these type of feelings, but they do. And I'm going to share with you one more thing. I had a conversation with a gentleman who's very deeply involved in the Family Law Center here in Houston, and he said to me something that was kind of interesting, which kind of further speaks to the uselessness of a lot of these laws that try to regulate morality. But he said during his divorce, his wife was able to get a no communication order for him in relation to his kids. And so the gentleman, he goes to the judge and he says, you know what, Judge, I am in violation of the no communication order. And the judge asks him, he says, oh yeah? Why is that? Have you talked to your kids? He said, no, I haven't spoken to them on the phone. I haven't talked to them in person. And he said, okay, well then how are you in violation of the non-communication order? He said, because by not communicating with them, I'm communicating that I don't care.
Right on.
And I thought that was a very profound statement. And I think that these laws that we put in place have unintended consequences. And I think if we follow just the common principle of due course and due process, what we see is that a lot of the things that we prohibit and or some of the things that we authorize under man's law don't meet the biblical principles, and they actually have the unintended consequences of having an adverse effect on kids, families, and everything that they're supposed to protect and regulate. Laws, man's law, I believe, ultimately destroys morality because it takes it away from being a faith-driven choice into a directive made under duress and coercion. Marquette, thank you for taking the time.
Thank you for having me.
That will be all for today with the Common Sense Corner. We will be here every Sunday. If you go to www.a4s2.com, you can join and be in our webcast audience. There are 500 seats available every weekend. Everyone else will have to stream it from the website as it's live and in its recorded mode. But if you do join up and you happen to get one of those 500 seats, you'll be able to chime in and enter comments and ask questions, and we can interact with you live on the Common Sense Corner. Thank you all. Good night, and God bless.